Hey, super quick before the show starts. If you missed Monday's show, we had an announcement at the very beginning. This is just like that, in case anybody missed it. The show after today's episode, this one that you're about to listen to, will no longer be on YouTube. We are moving to Anchor. That's where we'll be from now on. Anchor is supported on multiple different platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, basically wherever you get your podcast from. Normally get them from. So there's a link down in the description box. It's going to be the only thing I put down there. So you can go to that link, see that's where the show is from, and see where it's supported at. If you would be so kind as to, continue to listen to us, that would be greatly appreciated. I'm going to keep this short and sweet, unlike my rambling one last time. Thank you very much for your continued listenership, and I look forward to continuing to entertain you even more going forward. Thank you very much. And once again, the link is down below in the description box. Thank you. And welcome back to the NFLandU podcast. I'm your host, as always, Hayden Vassar. It's a Friday, February 7th. And wow, it feels like it's been a long week, hasn't it? Because, the last time we talked, it was Monday, and we were all celebrating the Chiefs and their amazing comebackiness. That's not a word. In the Super Bowl, and everybody was kind of in a celebratory party mood. It was a nice little atmosphere, and you flash forward to Friday now, and the Chiefs have already had their championship parade in their hometown on Wednesday, and it was a very lovely affair, had by most people except for that one guy who crashed his car after he tried to run over some people at the parade and got pitted by the police, and that other guy who fell out of a tree at the parade with his pants around his ankle and his butt up in the air. I mean, other than those two guys, it was a very lovely affair. It was a nice little party. Everybody was chugging beer. Mahomes was looking like Stone Cold Steve Austin out there. It was a lovely party atmosphere in Kansas City, and they deserved a nice little party. But, now it's Friday, and it feels like everybody's kind of, starting to move on with their football-y, I don't know why I was about to say footballiness. That's not a word. But just like in life, football, the world doesn't stop turning. It keeps moving. Stuff keeps happening. And that's what we're going to do on this show. So today we're going to talk about the draft that's coming up in a couple months. We're going to do our first big draft segment, yippee-ki-yay. And we're going to talk about free agency because that's coming up here in about a month. So we have stuff to talk about. But first, we're going to, as tradition dictates, at the NFLandU podcast, we're going to talk about news. So let's transition in the news real quick. And the first big news story of the week, we got a couple. On Thursday, it was announced that safety Eric Weddle will be retiring at the age of 35. Weddle played 13 seasons in the NFL after he was drafted in the second round of the 2007 NFL draft by the then San Diego Chargers, the San Diego Chargers. He would then spend the massive bulk of his career with the Chargers in San Diego. He then spent the 2016 to 2018 seasons with the Baltimore Ravens, and then he spent this past season, the 2019 season, with the Los Angeles Rams. Weddle retires as a 6-time Pro Bowler, and I think it was a 5-time All-Pro. The number I have in my notes is incorrect, so I think it's a 5-time All-Pro safety. Weddle was a tremendous player and a great leader. Almost every team that he went to, they would always talk about, oh, he's such a great leader. He's one of the big names in terms of leadership we have on the defensive side of ball. Everywhere he went, they would talk about how great of a leader he was. And even, I've already seen, people talking about it since he announced his retirement, that even though he was only there for one season and with the Rams, they're already talking about how the Rams lack a leadership positional guy on the defensive side of the ball now that Weddle is gone. That's just the type of impact he can have on a locker room. That's just the type of guy he was. Tremendous player, great leader, but more importantly, the thing I will always remember Eric Weddle for, he was one of the NFL's best characters over the last decade plus. If you've never seen Eric Weddle before, he's got that trademark lengthy beard. He referred to himself in the third person as the Beard. This is the kind of guy he was. He had this, very unique and magnetic, charismatic personality about himself that just made him fun to watch. I'm trying to remember exactly which Pro Bowl year it was. it was one of those seasons where, they were doing the draft and it didn't matter what conference you were for the Pro Bowl. You could just play on any team. And Eric Weddle was there at the Pro Bowl. He was one of the players. And he somehow got a microphone from one of the reporters. It was a couple days before the Pro Bowl. And he was just walking around interviewing players. He was just laying on the ground and just chilling with guys. It wasn't anything special. He was just vibing. It was just very just natural. It's just the kind of guy he was. He was funny without ever having to try to be funny. He was just easy to talk to and entertaining. That's what I'm going to remember Eric Weddle for. Is just he has this magnetic and charismatic personality that just made him fun to watch both on and off the field whenever you heard him talk. In fact, when he announced his retirement, he put out, a statement on Twitter, racking up his career accolades. And at the very end, it just said, "Beard out." That's just the type of guy Eric Weddle was. I'm saying it like he died. He's not died. He's just retired. He's going off to enjoy life now. And he will be missed because he really was just a fun guy to have around the NFL. One of their more, interesting and funny guys to just have on a team. Once again, Eric Weddle, the Beard, retires after 13 NFL seasons at the age of 35. I don't know why I got all dramatic there. Lastly, in our news section, we're going to stick with the Chargers in this one. It was announced earlier this week, I think like Monday or Tuesday, that the Chargers and head coach Anthony Lynn have agreed to a multi-year contract extension. We don't quite have the numbers on it yet, or how many years he's extended by, but it's a multiple-year extension, which is good. Lynn was entering the final year of his contract this upcoming season. They signed him to a 4-year deal a couple of years ago. And in his first 3 years, the results have been pretty good for Anthony Lynn. The first season, the Chargers went 9-7. They just barely missed the playoffs. And then the second season, that's when they won double digits. They gave the Chiefs a run for their money in the division. They won a playoff game in the wild card round. They beat Lamar Jackson and the Ravens last year. And then they went to the divisional round. They had a really great season. I think they won like 11 games, and they were one of the more interesting teams to watch in the playoffs. And then, this past season happened and all the injuries, and Phillip Rivers really played poorly, and it just derailed everything. And, in his 3 seasons as the head coach, they've had 2 winning seasons, a playoff win. The early results is what I'm getting at. He's been pretty good in the early results for Anthony Lynn. If they can just stay healthy, I think they'll be fine. And now the team is entering this, transition period where they're finally moving out of that soccer stadium that they were playing in LA, where they were sharing with the LA Galaxy. I mean, good Lord. They're getting not their own stadium. They're having to share it with the Rams, but they're finally getting in a football stadium. The situation with the fans is, kind of tumultuous. They don't really have a fan base right now. And they also don't know who's going to be their quarterback. I have money on Justin Herbert, but it sounds like they might roll out Tyrod Taylor, for Christ's sake. So it's this very weird transition period where a lot about the Chargers is in flux, and there's a lot we just don't know. But the one thing we do know is that their head coach, that I have a very high opinion on. I really like Anthony Lynn. I think he's a good head coach. He's going to be there for a couple more years, and I think that should have Charger fans excited. If you can stay healthy, you have a good team already in place, you should be good to go. So, once again, Chargers announced Anthony Lynn gets a multiple-year contract extension as they are moving into their new stadium in LA. Isn't it like SoFi? Or is that the Vegas stadium? SoFi Stadium. I really can't remember. But the new LA one looks pretty good too, yeah. So, that's it for news. That's all we got for news. And now we're going to change gears a bit and talk about the draft for a bit. Now that we know, the full draft order because, the playoffs are officially done, now we can, start looking at the draft in full. And I thought it would be a fun exercise for our first big draft segment because we talked about the Senior Bowl like 2 weeks ago. Because we started naming some names then. I thought it would be a fun segment to go through the full order of the draft, the first round, just the first round, all 32 picks, and talk about, each pick and what we think could happen, early on, because full disclosure, I am a total draft nerd, as most people just take the, the offseason off and they'll poke their head back in late April to watch the draft. I'm already starting to learn names, and guys, I love the entire draft process, so it's very fun to just sit here and just look at draft boards for like the next 2 months. So I thought it would be fun to just go through each pick and just talk about what they could do, what they might do, And what should they do very, very early on? And we'll see what it stacks up with once we get to like mid to late April. We'll revisit this. So without further ado, we're going to start at the first pick and then work all the way back to 32 with Kansas City. So first pick up, Cincinnati, and we all know what this is going to be at this point, right? There's no debate. We know it's going to be Joe Burrow, the quarterback from LSU, especially since it sounds like Andy Dalton's not coming back. If it's anything other than Joe Burrow, I would be stunned. Like, I would truly be stunned. There has been some talk, some tiny whispers that maybe the Bengals might go Chase Young here, the defensive end from Ohio State. Only because, the owners of the Bengals are big Ohio State fans. That's the only connection. But you have the Heisman winner right there at one. It's a slam dunk home run pick. It should be Joe Burrow. Now, moving on to the second overall pick, the Washington football team. Speaking of Chase Young, that's what this pick should be. It should be Chase Young. Ohio State is literally pumping out defensive pass rushers almost every other year that can come out and dominate. I mean, just look at Joey and Nick Bosa, the Bosa Bros. They both went to Ohio State, and they've been tearing up NFL offensive lines the past couple of years, especially Nick Bosa, the most recent one, who just won Defensive Rookie of the Year a week ago. So, and now you have one where the new one coming out, Chase Young, the newest pass rusher, who people are saying, this kid could be even better than both of the Bosa Bros. That should terrify people. I watched Chase Young play in a couple of games this year, and he is flat out terrifying. Just scary to watch him hunt quarterbacks. If it is anything other than Chase Young at 2, it is a crime against nature, because I truly believe, Joe Burrow is going to go number 1, but Chase Young is the best player in this draft. Period. End of statement. Simple as that. Moving on to the third overall pick. You got the Detroit Lions. Now, full disclosure. I live in Michigan. In fact, I live by Detroit. So I listen to, the Detroit sports stations when they're not, constantly bitching and complaining about everything. And from the exact moment that it became clear the Lions were getting the third overall pick, it has been nothing but talk about trading it. Just everybody and their great-grandmother in Michigan have been saying, this is the perfect spot that if a team wants to come up, this is the pick. This is the team that could trade down. And you know what? I agree with them. I think the Lions are sitting in perfect position to ask for a king's ransom to get a team to come up and take another player. Like think of it like this. Maybe the Dolphins, who pick at 5, are going to get nervous about Tua maybe getting drafted by somebody else. They can come up to 3 and get their guy. Or maybe somebody else in the draft falls in love with the player and are scared that they're going to fall and go to somebody else. They can go up and trade with the Lions. I think the Lions are the prime position, and I've had this opinion for about a month now, that this could be a pick that could get traded. That it's the most likely out of the top 5 picks, Cincinnati, Washington, Detroit, New York Giants, and Miami. Out of those 5, this feels like the most likely to get traded. And the Lions do need a lot of help, especially on defense. But I think the possibility of it getting traded is very high. But if they do decide to stay, if they can't get anybody to bite on the King's ransom bid, they could, stay there and pick the corner. I think it's from Ohio State, Jeffrey Okudah. He is a tremendous playmaker. And I know some people balk at the idea of taking a defensive back, in the top 5. I heard somebody say about a week ago that if you're taking a defensive back in the top 5 picks of the draft, he has to be like Jalen Ramsey level good. And this guy who said it, he was on a podcast, and his co-host immediately barked back and said, I don't only believe that Okudah is Jalen Ramsey good, I think he can be better than Jalen Ramsey good. Jeffrey Okudah is being talked about as the best defensive back in this draft. So the Lions are sitting really pretty. They can either, hike up a king's ransom, get a buttload of draft picks for somebody to come trade, or they can just stay at 3 and take Okudah and really fix their secondary, because that has been a massive problem. That was their Achilles heel. They were one of the worst pass defenses in the entire league this past season. So the Lions are sitting in like a win-win position at 3rd overall. And we're moving on to 4. This is an interesting one, though. The Giants at 4, very interesting pick, because Dave Gettleman, their GM, as we talked about a couple weeks ago when they hired their new head coach, and Gettleman barely survived. Gettleman is on the hot seat, their general manager. He needs to do something this season to prove he's worth keeping around. So now he's at the 4th overall pick, pretty big pick. He needs to do something. And we know it's been talked about for years how Dave Gettleman loves the hog molly lineman, which is a fancy way of saying he likes his big linemen on the defensive line. So there's that defensive tackle from Auburn who's been climbing draft boards. I honestly feel like that's a Dave Gettleman type of pick, picking a guy probably 3 or 4 spots before he should probably go, and Gettleman would take him. But Gettleman really needs to knock this one out. He really does. But in all brutal honesty, Giants need an offensive lineman. Like, desperately need an offensive lineman. Because the priority of this organization, Gettleman thinks he needs to save his job, and you got a rookie head coach coming in. The Giants aren't going to be a win-now team next year. They just aren't. So the priority of the organization needs to be developing Daniel Jones and continuing to help him grow. That needs to be the priority. And the best way to help him, because you already got offensive weapons in the wide receiver core and Saquon Barkley, get him an offensive lineman that can protect him. Daniel Jones, despite not playing the entire year, was one of the most pressured quarterbacks in the NFL. Get him an offensive lineman. I know it's not sexy. I know it's not flashy. The best way you can help a young quarterback, get him protection. It should be an offensive lineman at 4. But I've been saying the Giants should draft an offensive lineman in the first round like the past 3 years, and they never do it. So we'll see what the Giants do at 4. Now to 5, at the Dolphins. We've already talked about the Dolphins. They've apparently been in love with Tua Tagovailoa, the quarterback from Alabama, for like well over a year, and they've been drooling and waiting for this moment when he's on the draft board. And, this should be Tua at 5. Now, Tua is coming off that hip injury. It wasn't exactly a hip fracture, but his hip is jacked up, and he has numerous other injury concerns. He's got a couple ankle injuries on his resume. So his health checkup at the Combine, which he said he'll be at the Combine in a couple weeks in February, is going to be massive. That's going to determine a lot of things. So it should be Tua at 5. And the Dolphins will get their quarterback, their franchise quarterback. But it's just going to be a wait-and-see moment for everybody when he gets to the Combine and does his health checkup. That's really what we're waiting on. Those are going to be absolutely massive for both the Dolphins and maybe a couple other teams that are maybe keeping an eye on Tua. So next up, you got the Chargers at 6, and we talked about this a week ago, a little more like 2 weeks ago when we did the quarterback carousel. I'm calling back-to-back quarterbacks in the draft. Justin Herbert at 6, the quarterback from Oregon. Despite what the Chargers organization may think about Tyrod Taylor, go get your franchise guy. How often do you pick in the top 10 in the draft? Not very often. So go get your franchise quarterback. And you know what? If you really like Tyrod Taylor, then let Herbert sit for a year and let him learn. It's not that complicated. Safe money. Safe money, this should be Justin Herbert at 6. And moving on to 7. Carolina Panthers, they need defensive help. If Dwayne Brown, I think is his name, the defensive tackle from Auburn, is still there, that should be this pick. Dwayne Brown, just any defensive help. Highest rated defensive player on the board goes to Carolina at 7. Arizona, same thing for them at 8. Defensive help. They were bottom 3 defense in the league this past season. Defensive help anywhere. Defensive line, linebacker, secondary, literally anywhere would be a massive upgrade. Defensive help at 8 for Arizona. 9, Jacksonville, once again, defensive help. A lot of defensive help in the first round for these teams. Just straight up defensive help for 3 straight picks. The Jaguars are maybe going to lose Yannick Ngakoue in free agency, their defensive end, so maybe a pass rusher, maybe a secondary guy to finally replace Jalen Ramsey. Just some defensive help for the Jaguars would be greatly appreciated. Now we're at 10, the Browns. Now, here's what the Browns need. I've been saying it since the beginning of the last season. They need offensive line help. They need it desperately. And you know what? Here's where they get it. I say the Browns at 10, they go get an offensive lineman, get Baker some protection, and I promise things will be better. The Browns' offensive line was one of the worst in the league this past season. Go get yourself maybe the first one off the board. He might, at 10, it could be the first offensive lineman off the board if the Giants don't do it. So the Browns could have their pick of the litter. It could be perfect for them. So go get Baker some help at 10, and I promise things will be better. Now to the Jets at 11. Same exact problem. They need offensive line help. So go get your young quarterback, same deal as the Browns, some offensive line protection, and help this young man. Because you saw it with the Raiders this past season. I know that they really stumbled down the stretch, but for a while that offensive line was driving that team. And no, they didn't have weapons to throw to. They really only had the running back and Josh Jacobs. But when you have an offensive line that can give you protection, none of that matters. It does not matter who you're throwing to. When that offensive line is clicking and blocking, it makes the entire difference in the world. So at 11, the Jets also go offensive lineman. Now, interesting pick at 12, the Las Vegas Raiders. And the draft will be in Las Vegas, so this will be fun to watch. This one's tricky. With reports that the Vegas Raiders would be interested in Tom Brady if he became available, that doesn't sound good for Derek Carr, does it? You know, there's suddenly reports out there that the Raiders are thinking about maybe moving on from Derek Carr, which is something I've been, I don't want to say in favor of, but I've been talking about it from the moment John Gruden took over as head coach of that team. I just felt those two don't mix well at all. And now they're about to move into a brand new stadium, and there's talk they might get rid of Carr. It doesn't bode well. So Vegas, it just doesn't feel right calling them Vegas, does it? It just doesn't. The Raiders at 12, keep an eye on them. Maybe might be in the quarterback market. Maybe. Just worth keeping an eye on. But I think a much more interesting proposition, they go wide receiver here. I said that there would be a run early on wide receivers in this draft. I think it starts right here. Vegas takes a quarterback, or more likely they take a wide receiver at 12 because they really, really could use a true number one wide receiver because they don't have one. Next up, Indianapolis at 13. Kind of in the same position as the Raiders because despite my Jacoby Brissett fan club I had going on, he really didn't impress all that much. He had a good run in the first half of the season this past year, and then he had the injury, and he was never the same halfway through the year. So maybe this is a position where they look into taking a quarterback from the future for the Colts. I've seen a lot of people taking Jordan Love, the quarterback from Utah State. I don't think that's his actual name, just the quarterback from Utah State. We'll call him that, and mocking him there. So maybe that could be a landing spot for one of the quarterbacks in the draft. More likely, though, this should be another wide receiver. I mean, they need help. After Hilton, T.Y. Hilton, for the Colts, start naming the wide receivers for the Colts. You can't do it, can you? You can't. Because it's a hodgepodge of guys who really aren't that good. No offense, but so this should be an easy pick, wide receiver for the Colts. They already have a bunch of defensive talent. They got a solid offensive line. Running back crew could maybe use another secondary guy, but quarterback or wide receiver, those are the two main options. Tampa Bay. We think they're going to keep Jameis Winston. We think that's what they're doing. We're still not quite sure, but sorry, I had to take a sip of my drink. They could really use some defensive help. Not on the D-line. They got plenty of defensive line talent. Their linebacking crew is good because they got that guy from Michigan last year. They need secondary help. So go get you a nice little defensive back right there at 14. And now we're going to 15, the Broncos. Broncos are interesting because they could go a couple different ways. They could really use some offensive line help because their offensive line wasn't that good this past year. But they could also use a wide receiver because they got rid of Emmanuel Sanders. They have a young wide receiver there. I'm blanking on his name right now. But they could really use another kind of solid guy to help fill out that room and help make it more productive. So wide receiver or offensive lineman at 15 for the Broncos. Help your young quarterback Drew Lock continue to mature. At 16, Falcons, defensive line. I mean, not defensive line, just defensive help in general. They're losing one of their players to free agency. Oh, God, what's his name? I'm forgetting his name. I can't remember it. So maybe some secondary help, a defensive lineman, just anything. It's a lot like the boat with the Cardinals earlier, just anything that can help them right now. Dallas at 17. This one's tricky because there's a couple different ways this could go. They could go defensive tackle. That's been a glaring issue for that team for years. There's talk that Byron Jones, the corner, could leave, so maybe a defensive back. But here's the thing that not enough people are talking about for the Cowboys. Almost their entire receiving core are slated to be free agents this season. Amari Cooper, Randall Cobb, almost everybody except Michael Gallup is slated to be a free agent. So Dallas is already coming into a hard spot because they have to pay so many guys at once. Maybe if it's not a defensive assistant, like a defensive back or defensive tackle, this could be a wide receiver. You know, you let Randall Cobb walk, for example. I'm not saying they're gonna. I'm just saying, like, for example, and then maybe you go get a wide receiver here at 17. It's worth keeping an eye on, just because there's so many things going on at once with free agency and the draft. It'll be interesting to watch. So either defensive assistant, defensive back, defensive tackle, or a wide receiver at 17 for the Cowboys. Now, we get to 18, and it's the second pick for the Dolphins. You know, when they traded with the Steelers, when they sent Minka Fitzpatrick over to the Steelers, they get their first round pick, and here it is. Now, this pick, you know, because the Dolphins have 3 first round picks, you know, they could trade this one, maybe get some more capital, or they could use it. But literally, everything could use an upgrade for the Dolphins because, you know, we're assuming they got Tua, we're assuming they got their quarterback, so you name it, they need help. Wide receiver, offensive lineman, defense, literally anything is on the board there at 18. So literally anything and everything could use an upgrade. So we'll just write down anything at 18. Now we're going to 19. Once again, the Raiders are back on the clock. It's the last part of that Khalil Mack trade from a couple years ago because this would have been the Chicago Bears pick. But it's the Raiders now. So depending on what the Raiders go with earlier, this could either be traded, you know, because they got multiple picks, or they could go wide receiver here. Keep an eye on this one for maybe secondary help as well. Maybe a defensive back could come in because they needed help in that department this past season. So it'll be interesting to watch if they don't go wide receiver early. Maybe that would happen here, or a defensive back. Now, moving on. Another first-round pick for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Part of that Jalen Ramsey trade that happened earlier in the season. This would have been the Rams pick here at 20. Defensive help, specifically secondary. If you don't get them early, get your defensive back here. That's what this should be used for. Just buff up that defense. Buff it up. Simple and easy. 21, the Philadelphia Eagles. Now we're getting into playoff territory. The Philadelphia Eagles, wide receiver, simple. That position needs a massive upgrade for that team. Their offense was described as slow and sluggish, and they dropped the ball a lot. Go get yourself a young, fast wide receiver. Simple, easy, clear cut, no discussion about it. Wide receiver at 21 for the Eagles. Buffalo. Buffalo's tricky at 22. The Bills have a loaded defense. They got a solid starting running back and tight end. So you're thinking, what can they use? They're not going to go quarterback, despite what you trolls are thinking. They're not going to go quarterback. So maybe offensive lineman. Get yourself a nice protector for Josh Allen so he doesn't start panicking and running around a bunch, or a wide receiver. I'm just going to start saying wide receiver for everybody. There's a bunch in this draft. You have no idea. The wide receiver position is stacked in this draft. Maybe a wide receiver. Not to be a wide receiver 1 in Buffalo because they have John Brown. A guy who can come in and be the wide receiver 2. That way they could hit him with John Brown at 1, a secondary guy at 2, and then Cole Beasley as the wide receiver 3. That way you have suddenly more weapons to throw to for the Buffalo Bills. Moving on. New England at 23. If you remember our Do It With Me segment from a couple weeks ago, we said what the Patriots' first-round pick should be. A wide receiver. I know, I'm just mocking them to everybody, I swear. I have like 10 wide receivers going in the first round. So a wide receiver for the Patriots at 23, or maybe an offensive lineman. Maybe. Something that can go out there and help the offense. 24, New Orleans. Dead serious. Wide receiver. Give Michael Thomas some help. Name the wide receivers for the New Orleans Saints after Michael Thomas. Name them. Without using Google. You're stuttering, aren't you? Because you don't know them. Because they're not good. I think one of them's Ted Ginn. And the one thing I will always remember about Ted Ginn, when he played for the Panthers in their 2015 season, when Deion Sanders was talking about him, he said that Ted Ginn doesn't have any hands to catch. He said if babies were being thrown out of a burning building, he would not trust Ted Ginn to catch them. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that's what he said. So they really need some help at the backing up of Michael Thomas. Get some other pass catchers in there. That way Michael Thomas doesn't have to set records every single year in pass catching because they literally have nobody else. 25, the Vikings. This is an interesting one because their wide receiver core is stacked. They're coming into a make or break year. I think their O-line's okay. Maybe some defensive help. Maybe some secondary help. It'll be interesting to watch. This was a pick I really struggled with trying to figure out what the Vikings should do here. And I wrote down in my notes and want to mix it up, and I'm not going to say that one out loud because it makes no sense. And now looking back at it, when I wrote it at 11 o'clock at night in a fever dream, I said quarterback for the Vikings at 25, and that makes no sense now. That makes no sense. So maybe some secondary help for the Vikings at 25. Now 26, the last pick for the Dolphins. This would have been the Texans pick, but the Laramie Tunsil trade before the season started happened, and now the Dolphins have it again at 26. Now, very late round, first round. We've seen a lot of teams sneak back into the first round to nab players that could have slid. So maybe trade bait again for the Dolphins. But if they don't, this would be the perfect opportunity for the Dolphins to take a running back. I think we may get one and only one running back in the first round this year. And I think it'll go to the Dolphins. It makes the most sense. They need upgrades everywhere across that team. And no running back is really getting first round grades. So maybe have the Dolphins take him with the 26th overall pick. And I've seen a lot of people say this name specifically, DeAndre Swift from the University of Georgia. Makes a ton of sense to me. So I think the Dolphins take the first running back in the draft at 26th overall. Now, 27th, you got the Seattle Seahawks. They can either go two ways with this. Defensive help, which they really need. They were just an average run-of-the-mill defense this past season, or offensive line. In personal opinion, leaning towards offensive line. Russell Wilson's getting older. I say that like he's an old man. He needs to be protected more. He doesn't have to run for his life on every single play. Get him some O-line help at 27, or defensive help. I won't be mad if they go defense. 28, the Ravens. Ravens have a ton of defensive talent. We already know that. They got a solid running back. Their O-line is good. And you look at the team that had the best offense in the NFL and you think, how can we make it better? Here's how. Despite, their fancy, scoring a bunch of points, most of their passing damage came via their tight ends, not through their wide receivers. They have Hollywood Brown, and I like Hollywood Brown as a rookie, but they need more. They need more. So, once again, bring me that wide receiver out here. Bring another wide receiver out. Ravens take a solid one at 28, help to build that wide receiver core and spread the ball around. 29, The Titans. Titans have one of the worst offensive lines in football. Give Ryan Tannehill some protection and help Derrick Henry, assuming those two are back next season, because they are free agents. So, offensive line at 29 for the Titans. We've made it to the final three, people. We're almost there. 30, the Packers. Packers offense was not good this season, despite winning 13 games, despite making it to the NFC Championship game. They were missing a step. Now, that could be blamed on Aaron Rodgers always looking for the home run ball. That could be blamed on, their offense lacking production behind Devontae Adams. That's what I would really like to blame it on. Give me another wide receiver at 30. Oh, yeah, we're just handing them out like hotcakes. Go get you another wide receiver. In all honesty, I would take an unknown wide receiver at 30 over most of the Green Bay Packers wide receivers. I really have that low of an opinion of every name on that roster behind Devontae Adams. I have that low of an opinion of them. All right, final two. Okay, we're almost there, people. Oh, God, my throat is dry. 49ers at 31. This is an interesting one. Team is already loaded, but they do have a couple names that are up for free agency. So, defensive line. I think, there could be one or two guys that could maybe leave. So, why not go get another defensive lineman? Help really just further that rotation. Or secondary guy. That could be interesting. I think 31, the pick for the 49ers, defensive guy. And then lastly, the Kansas City Chiefs at 32. Easy decision, offensive lineman. Mahomes has earned a massive paycheck. And you know what? I think he's earned some protection. Go get that man some help. Protect your generational great quarterback. Simple as that. Whew. I know that was a lot, and I know there was a bunch of information coming at you fast. That's it for our first big draft segment of the year. We'll do more of it when we get, when we come back from hiatus and we're going into April. We'll talk more about the draft then. But it's just fun to really set the slate. We haven't talked about the draft too much on this show, so it was fun to really talk about. Now, the next big event on the draft calendar is the Combine in a couple of weeks. I think it starts February 27th. So I'll be watching that. And if you're not a lonely football nerd like me, I bet you have better things to do with your time. And now we're going to transition one more time to one more segment, and we're going to talk about free agency. Because the draft's not till April, technically, but free agency is technically the next biggest thing on the NFL horizon. It's the thing that everybody's going to be talking about. Free agency begins when the new league year begins, which is March 18th, which is a little over a month from now, because today's the 7th when we're recording this. Now, teams will have the opportunity to talk with their players, March 16th to try and get deals hatched. But everything hits the fan on March 18th. So those guys that we've talked about that we're saying they become free agents soon, they officially become a free agent the 18th at like 3 o'clock Eastern time. Free agency, especially those first few days, are always hectic and with a lot going on. But this year looks to be an especially hectic one. The normal big names will, of course, be out there. You got a running back or two. You got a couple defensive linemen. A big name corner is on the market. But the big story this offseason is going to be the quarterbacks, as they always are. What will Phillip Rivers do? Is Tom Brady staying or is he going? What's going on with Ryan Tannehill? Those are all going to be talked about to death. The quarterbacks will be the major story, as they always are, and will take a majority of the time. But here quickly, before we wrap things up, I want to take you through 5 names who are big names on the free agent market that are going to be free agents at 3 o'clock Eastern on March 18th, which is a Wednesday. And I want to take you through 5 names really quick and why I think they could be big names on the free agent market. First and foremost, number 1, you ready? Derrick Henry, running back, Tennessee Titans. Yes, the man that put up Earl Campbell type numbers in the postseason and the 2019 NFL rushing champion is a pending free agent. Henry is the machine that makes the Titans offense purr like a kitty cat. And you know what? I fully expect him to be back with the team next year. And now you're wondering, why did you include Derrick Henry on this list then? Here's why. There's a pretty massive problem. Henry wants money. Like money. In fact, on a recent appearance on the Rich Eisen show, the radio show, there might have been a miscommunication when Rich Eisen asked this question. Maybe Henry didn't fully understand it. But Rich Eisen asked him in regards to Ezekiel Elliott's contract, is that the floor? Now, there might have been a miscommunication in what Rich Eisen meant and what Derrick Henry meant, but Derrick Henry basically said that he felt that Ezekiel Elliott's contract is the floor, so that's the starting point. Now, if you're quickly Googling what Ezekiel Elliott's contract was, 6 years, $90 million. If I remember correctly, that's the most a running back has ever gotten in a contract. Trying to remember what Todd Gurley's was. But Derrick Henry is apparently saying, unless there was a miscommunication, like I said, that the starting point is a 6-year, $90 million contract. Oh, that's a lot of numbers, ain't it? That is a significant hurdle for any team. And the Titans are in a very interesting position because Ryan Tannehill is also a free agent. So they have to find a way to pay him as well. So they have to find a way to make a bunch of money that'll make Derrick Henry happy and make a bunch of money to make Ryan Tannehill happy. They went from a team that had a bunch of cap space to a team that's about to have no cap space. So Titans will be an interesting team to watch. What are they going to do with Derrick Henry? Next name up, number 2. We talked about him a bit earlier in the show when we talked about the Cowboys. Byron Jones, their corner. Byron has easily been the best part of the Cowboys secondary the last few seasons and has earned a nice, whopping paycheck. As a Cowboys fan, I would absolutely love to have Byron Jones on my team going forward. There's just a problem with that. Cowboys might not be able to afford him. As I already mentioned, most of their wide receiver core are free agents. And Dak Prescott needs a new contract too. So Amari Cooper, their number 1 wide receiver, and Dak Prescott need new contracts. Like right now. And, Prescott and Cooper's contracts are going to rank above Jones on the totem pole. And, if you're doing the equation, Byron Jones is quickly finding himself to be the odd man out in this equation. So if the Cowboys have to make a tough decision, Byron Jones could be hitting the market this offseason, which sucks because he's been a truly great defensive back for the Cowboys these last couple of years. Really evolved into something special. They just might not have enough funds to pay him. So it'll be interesting to watch. He'll command money in the free agent market. Third, this is a name we've been talking about for weeks now. Eric Armstead, defensive end, San Francisco 49ers. We talked about it a couple minutes ago that a couple of those guys could hit free agency. Eric is one of them. One of the main faces of that fearsome monster defensive line that the 49ers have could be leaving in free agency. Armstead is one of the few players that made a name for himself on that defense this season, and I'm slightly expecting a bidding war to take place for his services because, he's still on his rookie contract, so it's not a ton of money he's been earning, but some team is going to come in and say, hey, here's like $15 million a year. You want to come play for our defensive line? And we've seen it happen, before where teams will go out and pay a buttload for a guy who's good in I don't want to say he's good in only spurts because he could be more than that, but go in and take a guy out of a great defense and then he comes and doesn't perform too well, but they massively overpaid him because of what they saw. I am slightly expecting a bidding war to take place for Eric Armstead, but maybe he'd be willing to give the 49ers a discount to, really hang on and maybe win a championship in the next year or two. So Eric Armstead, another name to watch. Number 4, Yannick Ngakoue, defensive end, Jacksonville Jaguars. Yannick had a pretty good season. Flew under the radar a bit. I think we talked about him maybe once or twice on the show. But Yannick really had a solid season, was one of the very few lone bright spots for the Jags defense this past season, and provided constant pressure on opposing quarterbacks. Big enough to impact, to warrant a new contract. I mean, he this past season he got paid like $800,000, just a little over that. So some teams are going to come in and give him a couple million, and he'd be happy to get that. So maybe he stays with the Jags. Maybe he goes somewhere else. It'll be interesting to see what Yannick Ngakoue does. Another defensive end that'll be on the market. And at number 5, last name up, Kenyon Drake, running back, Arizona Cardinals. Now you remember, Kenyon Drake started the season with the Dolphins. They were tanking, and then they traded him to the Cardinals. And then once he got to the Cardinals, dude took off like a rocket. Had some monster games in the second half of the season. One against the Seahawks, if I remember correctly. He put up some really, really solid numbers. But the Cardinals are in a very interesting place because, they have that David Johnson contract on the books, that really massive contract that they gave him, and it's become painfully clear that David Johnson is on the decline and not doing too hot. That's why they traded for Kenyon Drake. And Kenyon Drake right now is the unquestioned number one running back for the Cardinals. Like, nobody can debate that fact. Like, that's just a stone cold scientific fact that Kenyon Drake should be the guy going forward. So they have to pay him, right? He needs a new contract. So it'll be interesting to see what they give Kenyon Drake, because he should be one of the building blocks for that Cliff Kingsbury regime going forward, because he was just absolutely solid for them this year. And, what are they going to do with David Johnson and his massive money contract? So it'll be interesting to see what they do with Kenyon Drake in that regard. So those are 5 names to keep an eye on when free agency starts March 18th. Just a few of the key names. There's a ton of other names. And I know we didn't talk about the quarterbacks too much, like Ryan Tannehill, Phillip Rivers, Tom Brady, to name a few. But they're going to command most of the headlines anyway, so it was nice to name, 5 guys who could, be major impacts for their new teams if they do decide to move. But there are plenty of other players hitting the market, making it a truly interesting upcoming free agency period starting March 18th. So that's it for today's show. And like I said, on Monday's show, we're going to take a hiatus because it's important to take breaks in life with everything so you don't get burnt out. And we're in the off season anyway, so there's literally nothing to talk about for the next couple weeks. So like I said earlier, the free agency period starts March 18th. So that means we'll be back that Friday. March 18th is a Wednesday. So we'll be back that Friday, March 20th. We'll do one weekly show a week. Sound fair? Sound simple? This is the moment where I suddenly and stunningly announced the NFLandU podcast. Yes, I know. Stunning, I know. I'm not going to watch that dumpster fire. Well, I will watch that dumpster fire because I hate myself. But the XFL starts this weekend, guys. Who's ready for that monstrosity? I mean, good Lord. Super Bowl just ended. I don't need more football. So, another reason why we're taking a break is because a lot of the next couple months is going to be a lot of, pro days for college guys and, workouts at the combine. And to be brutally honest, I covered a pro day for my school, Eastern Michigan, when I wrote for their student-run newspaper. And it was one of the most boring things I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I love football. And that pro day made me want to blow my brains out. I was so bored. I ended up talking to some player's agent. I had it mixed up. Some player's agent for like 20 minutes about Mexican food. Like, everybody was so bored, and I was there for like 4 or 5 hours. It was ridiculous. So I don't want to subject anybody to that kind of levels of boredom. So that's why we're taking a break. It'll be fun, go enjoy other things, Football doesn't need to be a year-round thing. People need to take time off. So once again, we'll be back March 20th, that Friday, where we'll, talk about free agency and all this, that, and therefore. So go enjoy your break. Go have some fun. And thanks for stopping by. Thanks for listening this season. It's been a fun season, hasn't it? When I started this show, it was meant to be I was just recovering from heart surgery, and I had a lot of free time on my hands. And I just wanted to see if I could enjoy broadcasting, talking about football. And there were a lot of bumps, and it wasn't pretty at first, but eventually we kind of got the hang of it. Kind of, maybe, not really. But I enjoy doing this. In fact, I love doing it, and I can't wait to, start draft coverage. And when we get to the off season, I've got bits planned, and I can't wait to do next season. We'll be even better. So this was a fun season. So thank you for stopping by. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk again March 20th. Bye.